Welcome to the Garden Angelus, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma.
And I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana. Good afternoon, Dee.
Good afternoon, Carol. I see you have a quote for us.
I have a quote. Autumn shows how beautiful it is to let things go, by Unknown. Unknown has written so many quotes.
Yes, so has Anonymous.
Well, this is a good one. It's not quite autumn.
Not quite.
We're at that part of the year where you're thinking, I'm probably not going to make that better this year, so let's just let it go. You know that.
Or you got to pull it out.
Or, as in your case, you had a huge, gigantic storm go through.
Yes, it was the worst storm I've ever weathered. And that says a lot because I've lived in Oklahoma my whole life and we've had worse tornadoes, but maybe not in my area. But last night, there was a tornado and it wasn't a huge one because we don't normally get tornadoes in August. We also don't normally get big storms in August, but it got really hot yesterday. There was a lot of humidity in the air and a cold front decided to barrel down and it turned into one giant explosion. And we had all the things. We had hail, straight winds, a tornado within a couple of miles of us south, so it didn't hit us. But I woke up this morning to trees and limbs and broken tomato cages, the tall ones, and blown over fences. I mean, I've got a mess to clean up.
Well, and I saw some pictures you put on Facebook, and it looked like you saved your tomato variety that you're in love with.
Yes. 1884 Yellow Pink Heart, my favorite tomato this year.
And it looks like maybe the other tomato cages, you kind of maybe just put those away for the season.
Actually, I didn't. I actually pulled those back together and stood them back up and they're okay. But what I did do is I pulled out a few of the other tomatoes that also looked sad and they were in smaller cages and they were smaller varieties, but whatever. I pulled them out because here's the thing, they're shading other stuff that I want. And maybe I didn't care so much about those varieties, but all the ones I cared about, I propped right back up.
Well, that's good. But it is the time of year where you say, I'm not going to get to planting that bed or that container that's been sitting there waiting. I'm not going to plant that unless I put something fallish in it. It's time to let a few things go.
Yeah, and it blew over my cutting garden. So all my zinnias are lying on their side, all my sunflowers. So I'll be pulling those up tomorrow. That's the way it goes.
Yep. Some years, the end comes sooner than other years.
Yeah, and you know what? We've had a good tomato season in Oklahoma for the most part. If you got your tomatoes in early, and in this case, indeterminates did better than determinates because they grow all season and they got through all that rain we had this spring, and we've had a great long summer. So I have no complaints other than I'm just simply irritated at so much stuff I got to clean up. But
right.
I'm also I will say this. The storm probably took care of some pollen from our flower we're going to talk about today.
Well, we're talking about two flowers. We're only going to talk briefly about the one, and that is ragweed.
Yeah, and ragweed pollen, and I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but ragweed pollen is a huge problem in Oklahoma this time of year. It's giant ragweed, Ambrosia trifida, or trifida, is giant ragweed, and it is doing, it performs well in Oklahoma. I hate it.
Well, and it performs well in Indiana, and I think we're a couple of weeks out, and I am very fortunate not to suffer hay fever from ragweed.
Lucky you. So what does everyone confuse ragweed with, though? Because the other plant that we're going to talk about is a wonderful pollinator plant, but it always gets confused with ragweed.
Right, and that's goldenrod. And because goldenrod and ragweed bloom at the same time, and then people suffer from hay fever, ragweed is a very non-attractive greenish flower. Nobody would look at it and say how beautiful. So they go out into their garden and what's blooming? Goldenrod, and their nose is running and they think, oh, goldenrod, you are causing me problems. And goldenrod is innocent.
goldenrod is completely innocent because goldenrod has the kind of pollen that does not blow in the wind. It is not lightweight, and it is gathered by insects and used and then spread around on other goldenrod. And it is a beautiful plant. It's one of our best fall bloomers. It's a great pollinator plant. But I see even on searches on Google, it identified as ragweed. Ragweed is a big, giant, tall plant that is green. And it has these ugly blooms on top that you can't see. Now, I will say some of my beekeeper friends say that the bees also use ragweed pollen, which is good for allergy sufferers who eat honey. Because if you eat your local honey, they say that it helps with allergies. So right now, just don't blame goldenrod. And there's a lot of different varieties of goldenrod. There's one that's even endangered that you grow.
Right. And before we get to that, I did want to make a comment about the botanical genus for ragweed is ambrosia, which literally means food of the gods. So what's the deal? That must be just like somebody's sick joke.
It must be. I had to laugh.
There, if you looked at some herbal, probably there's some obscure use for ragweed juice or something. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, it is kind of funny. And nobody really, from my research online, nobody really understands why it is called ambrosia, except for that it's part of some other herbs that are also called ambrosia, and it got lumped in there. So it's a terrible, terrible plant. I hate it. It grows out in the country like crazy.
Right. So you mentioned I do have a rare goldenrod in my garden. And before people get all verklempt thinking that I went out and picked a rare goldenrod and brought it to my garden, this goldenrod was almost thought to be extinct. And its natural habitat is and you won't know where this is, it's the corner of southern Indiana where it kind of meets with Ohio and Kentucky. There's like a little corner there. And there's some rocky outcrops and some limestone glades in that area. And that's where it would be typically found. Mm-hmm. And so it's listed on the Center for Plant Conservation's National Collection of Endangered Plants. And it's Solidago shortii, which is short. Short is not the way it is. Short is named after Dr. Charles Wilkins, who discovered the plant around 1840.
Yeah, I actually think, I might be wrong on this, but I think Bustani sells it. But don't quote me on that because it's possible they don't. But anyway.
They do. If they're selling a goldenrod that's called Solar Cascade,
yes,
that is Solidago shortii.
Ah, there you go.
And the reason they're selling it is because the Cincinnati Zoo Botanical Garden has a native endangered plant program, and they were able to collect seeds from this goldenrod, which is it's in like a secret location. They don't tell everybody where they go find it.
Right.
They collected seeds and then they propagated them, and they've been getting it out into the trade, and they call it Solar Cascade. And so I went there several years ago, probably at least 10, on a garden writer's trip, and they gave us all sample plants of Solar Cascade.
Huh.
And it does well in my garden. It's a spreader.
Yeah, this sounds really familiar to one that I have in my garden. And I think I've actually grown Solar Cascade, but I don't know that for sure. And here's the thing, in my garden, I went kind of crazy one year and bought all the goldenrods that I could find. And now they've all mixed with each other, and there's no telling what I really have. I know I have several different ones, but I couldn't tell you which one's which. I know I have one that is a real spreader. I mean, that stuff, ooh, goodness.
Well, I find that I have two goldenrods. The first one I know definitely is Solar Cascade. And the reason they gave it that name is that as it matures, it almost lays over in like a cascade.
Yeah, it falls kind of. Yeah.
It needs a nice big area.
It does.
And then it kind of folds over. And I love it. And it's one of those ones that if you cut it back in May, late May, and we talked about this on an earlier podcast, It won't be quite as tall and it won't be quite as cascadey, but it will still cascade and it'll still be a lovely plant.
And it'll be a little stockier, not so tall, and won't fall over in your paths.
And it is just barely starting to show the yellow. So it'll be blooming here in another full bloom, probably in another week or so.
Mine are all just starting to bloom. And we are going to link in the show notes to American Meadows because they have several goldenrods available. Of those that they have, I grow both showy. I grow one called Showy Wand, which I think is the same as their showy. And I grow one called Stiff Goldenrod. And then I also have one like you have, which is a weed that just showed up because it's a native plant in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I was going to mention my other goldenrod. Since I do not have any recollection of buying goldenrod, not that I wouldn't if the right one came along, it has to have just shown up, and then I let it go because one year it did not start blooming in my garden until November.
Wow.
And so I have this big thing where I try to have something new blooming every month of the year in Indiana outside in my garden. And I thought, well, it might be a weed, but it's staying because it's blooming in November. Now, most years now it starts to bloom more in October, so that might have been an anomaly. Mm-hmm. But it is an unnamed variety, could be a weed, could be something I forgot I planted, but it's staying.
So the lesson to all of this is weed, native plant is often the same thing. One person's weed is another person's native. And
oh, yeah.
Also, don't blame goldenrod for ragweed's bad behavior.
And because we also should say that goldenrod is native to North America, but our friend the British gardeners love it. It's an exotic plant to them.
Right. And on those hot years that they've been having recently in the past few years, I bet goldenrod does really well because it's a prairie plant and it's used to the heat.
So if people are going to add goldenrod to their garden, here's the thing I'd say. This is not for a neat and tidy garden. You need to have room where it can spread out a little bit. If you have a prairie type planting, which I have in one area, this is the perfect plant. It's a great season extender because it's not going to bloom early. It's going to bloom later, like ours are starting to bloom. Very little care needed other than in the spring, cut it back. And then sometime late May, if you don't want it to get too tall, give it a half chop. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and it blooms with asters and mums, garden mums. So
oh, yeah.
That's another good reason. One of the studies, they haven't done this study, I don't think, in the United States, but they did a big study on honeybees in England, and they discovered that honeybees had to go really, really far for nectar sources in the fall. They had really good sources in the spring and early summer, but in the months like from August through October, they had very little, and they had to go up to 3 miles to get pollen and nectar. If you provide, and we could talk about asters and we could talk about them all, asters and mums in another podcast, but if you provide goldenrod, asters, and mums, yay, because you are really helping your pollinators. Not just honeybees, you're helping all bees, because bees and butterflies love those plants. And those are great American plants, and we should all grow them. That's what I think. Of course, my garden is a big, old, giant prairie mess, so what do I know?
Well, and I will say, is there anything prettier in the fall on a beautiful day when the sky is clear blue and you've got purple asters flowering with your goldenrods? I think that's a beautiful combination.
Right. And if you add in Will's Wonderful Mum with those, or Country Girl, which is another mum that you can buy online, I just can't think of anything prettier.
And you can stand there, and this is better than TV. There are butterflies and pollinators you never knew it existed are all over those plants, and it is fun just to watch and see all the activity.
Yeah, I went out yesterday before the storm, and I could not believe how many wasps I saw on my sneezeweed, which we haven't talked about sneezeweed yet either. It's another great prairie plant. And the different types of wasps, most people know like 3 types of wasps: the red one, the black one, and I'm being kind of silly. The red one, the black one, and mud daubers, right? But there's a whole lot of different ones.
You know, hornets are a type of wasp.
Yeah, don't like them.
paper wasp,
Well, that's a red
cicada
one.
killing wasp,
Yeah.
and really most wasps. And we should talk about this on our insect podcast we're going to have. Most wasps fall under the category of wasp, run for your life, and really they don't want to sting you.
No, not in the garden, especially unless they have a nest nearby. They will not mess with you. And yesterday I saw there's a thin one that has a skinny waist. It's a really thin waist wasp. There's another wasp that's real shiny black blue, and it was on there. And then I saw one that I'd never seen before, and it had both red and black on it. It was a little bitty wasp, and I thought, that is one cool creature. So, like you said, it's better than TV.
Right. And I am actually, I'm jealous of those wasps that have those little tiny waists. I think, how come I can't have a little tiny waist?
How come? Yeah, I don't know. How come I don't either?
Probably because I eat candy and wasps don't. I don't know.
Yeah, and they only live a little while. We get to live a long time.
Anyway, we'll talk about wasps in a future podcast because there are literally thousands of species of wasp out there.
I have another quote for us. Can I do it?
Yes.
What wondrous life is this I lead? Ripe apples drop about my head. The luscious clusters of the vine upon my mouth do crush their wine. The nectarine and curious peach into my hands themselves do reach. Stumbling on melons as I pass, ensnared with flowers, I fall on grass. And that's by Andrew Marvell. And he did it in Thoughts of a Garden, which was from the 1600s. Wow.
I love that quote.
Oh, it's very visual.
Yes.
Don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I loved it.
It's fall in a garden.
And it comes to it is fall in a garden. Although our apple tree lost all of its apples, I think we had raccoon problems, which made my husband very, very sad. I should have planted those trees in a different spot. But that's not the fruit we're talking about today, or vegetable.
We're talking about melons today. So, Dee, do you call them cantaloupe or muskmelon?
I call them cantaloupes.
I do too, for the most part.
Occasionally, I guess when I think of muskmelons, I think of those green honeydews, but I don't know. I honestly hadn't thought about it that much. But when I think of the melon that has got that kind of ivory outside with veining, and you can just see the orange in the ribs, and then when you cut it open, it's that beautiful orange. That's a cantaloupe.
Yes, I would agree. Cucumis mellow.
So I have a story about cantaloupe. You want to hear it?
I do want to hear your cantaloupe story.
So when I was pregnant with Megan, who is my daughter that is 26, and I was really, really sick. I was really nauseous. And now that Megan is pregnant with her child, and, it's exciting times at our house. So I think about pregnancy a lot because of Megan, because she comes and visits. Well, I was thinking the other day about my melons that I grew that year. And I was back then, all I did was vegetable gardening, and I put in corn. And then to do the Three Sisters planting, I decided to use as one of the Three Sisters cantaloupe and climbing beans for the other one. And so I planted all that out there, and then I got pregnant, and I got really, really sick, and I was sick for about 14 weeks. And I could not go out in the garden because the heat made me sicker, right? So Guess what was happy in the garden?
The melons and the beans and the corn?
Well, the melons were. Corn takes some work, right? Because you got to hill it up, feed it some protein, blah, blah, blah. Well, melons don't care. Melons are tough plants. And that year they had, the Bermuda grass got in the bed, so it choked out the green beans. But the muskmelons, or cantaloupes, they went crazy. And that was the first year I grew the variety Ambrosia. And so one day I walked outside about 14 weeks, and I looked out there, and I could see those cantaloupes shining in the grass underneath the
beacons,
underneath the dead corn and the dead beans. And I thought,
beacons.
I jumped up and down with joy. And I thought, I grew something, and it actually worked, right? And so I ran out there and I started getting the melons, but the smell of the melons made me sick. So I piled them into my basket and just ran as fast as I could gathering them all. And I had 12 cantaloupe that year. 12.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of cantaloupe. I give them out to everybody. But it made me feel like a success in a year where I didn't feel very successful.
Sometimes it's not easy to be successful in the garden, so I'm happy for you that worked out.
Yeah, that was a good year. That was a good melon year. So let's talk a little bit about what melons like. You wrote a big old article on cantaloupes.
I did, but I wanted to say one thing, though. Indiana, by the way, is known for cantaloupes.
Yep. Apparently.
And there's one, and they say that the flavor of the cantaloupe is affected by where it's grown. And down in southwestern Indiana, there's a town called Decker.
Uh-huh.
And apparently Decker melons are all the thing. And when the Decker melons show up in all the farmers markets, people get all excited. And then they say, can I grow a Decker melon? And the answer is like, move to Decker, Indiana to grow a Decker melon.
Okay, well, wait a minute. Isn't everything that we grow affected by the soil in which it's grown?
Yeah, but some reason they just have made these famous.
Yeah, exactly. They've made them famous. Just like in Oklahoma, there's a place called Rush Springs, and Rush Springs is known for its watermelon festival and for its watermelons. And my mom swore about watermelons that were from a certain town in Missouri. So I almost think I'm not dissing on Decker or its melons. I'm not saying they aren't good, but any homegrown melon is fine. A good melon. If it gets to maturity and doesn't go overripe, they are so good and melt in your mouth. They're just one of those things you should grow yourself if you're going to do it.
Right, because they are juicier and have much more a stronger flavor, I think, if you grow it yourself, because you can let it stay out in the garden a little bit longer. I mean, they have to pick stuff earlier to ship it, and if they shipped a really ripe melon, it would be mush by the time it got to the store.
Yeah, there's no way you could do it. If you grow your own melon, you can go out there and check it every day or so and pull it off when it's just right.
Right.
And you'll know it's just right for many reasons. It smells good, for one thing.
It does smell good.
Unless you're pregnant.
Yeah. And then the stem will just kind of slip away.
Right.
When you pull it, it'll just kind of come out in your hand. You're like, oh, that one's ready.
Right.
And then they're very juicy and they're very sweet. But I don't usually grow cantaloupe. And do you know why?
I'm guessing it's because your garden isn't huge.
Correct. And I would have to put in a very strong support, because a well-grown melon plant could be 6 feet by 6 feet area. I mean, it would be everywhere. Same with pumpkins. We'll talk about pumpkins in the fall.
It's the same idea, though. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a big plant. And so, I could probably grow it under the corn. And I have some years grown it under the corn, and I'll have to look at the variety I grew, because it was from 1934, and it was a smaller melon, almost like one melon could be one person's dessert.
That actually sounds pretty good.
It was very good.
I've grown some other melons that were not cantaloupes, and I got to say, I did not have as much luck with them. Isn't there a melon called cassava?
Yeah, I guess. You tell me.
I think I grew cassavas. Yeah, I did. I grew a cassava melon one year. I looked it up just to make sure I was right. It's Casaba. I did not think it was worth the soil it was grown upon. I'm not dissing on all cassavas. Some people may love them, but a good cantaloupe is worth its weight in gold and is delicious. And we grow a lot of cantaloupe in Oklahoma. Even the farmers do. So sometimes I just buy them at the farmer's market if I don't want to take up the space. But what you could do in your garden, if you wanted to, is get one of those supports that makes like a teepee kind of triangle, support, and it's a fence, and you could grow them along that fence, and then they can hang down. Because one of the things with melons is sometimes when they touch the soil, that spot can get disease or insects or sow bugs, stuff like that. If you grow them on a trellis of some sort, a strong trellis, then a lot of times they will do really well and you won't have damage. The same thing with cucumbers, squash. I can think of lots of things.
Right. And if I wasn't so lazy, I probably should do that.
But maybe you don't want to do that and you just want to buy a melon,
Well, I will be truthful. If somebody offers me a decent cantaloupe, I'll eat it. But I don't go like all gaga trying to grow a good melon.
You
It's
don't?
just not my thing. No.
So you say that the seeds can be sown directly in the garden, or you can pre-sprout the seeds indoors to get ahead. Do people pre-sprout them in Indiana to get ahead?
They do, because melons like it to be really warm.
Yeah, they do.
And it's kind of geeky to say, but it's true. The soil should be 60 degrees or warmer for them to germinate.
Sure.
No threat of frost whatsoever. And so, I think it's ridiculous to buy like squash seedlings, but I might buy a melon seedling just because you want to maybe give it a couple of week head start inside, or in a container on the patio where you could whisk it inside if it got really cold one night, and then put it out there and just get a little jump on the season.
Okay, so I'm going to say in Oklahoma, you don't need to do that. We have such a long season, and it gets so hot so fast most of the time that you're fine. Just put them out there when you're going to put out squash, watermelon, any of those heat-loving type plants. Super easy to grow, especially if they're cushioned by Bermuda grass, like they were in my garden that year. They liked it.
The other thing about melons,
Yeah,
is if the fruit sits directly on the ground, it can rot.
sure.
And so when I grew melons the last time, I used like those red plastic cups and made little stands for them to keep them up off the ground.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And yeah. Or you could just take like I hate to say that you have styrofoam plates around. They're not the most environmentally friendly thing, but if you have like styrofoam plate, or if you got a styrofoam container from a restaurant to bring leftovers home, you could wash that off, and then you could put that under it just to keep it from direct contact with the ground.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, that would work great.
And some people will, to get the ground to warm up faster, you could put down like black plastic, which I also don't use much of. But if you do that, you can just grow the vine on top of the black plastic. I mean, make a hole where you're going to put the plant, and then it'll warm the soil up faster. And then you could just leave the black plastic, and again, keeps the fruit off the ground.
Yeah, there's a whole movement, a whole agricultural movement in Oklahoma where they grow on top of black plastic. They make these rows and they hill them up to get warmth to the soil and also good drainage. They put black plastic down. It's a special industrial black plastic. And then they make holes in the plastic and plant plants in it. It's very, very successful. It's not the way I want to grow. I like to grow things a little more naturally because that's just how I roll. But I can see the worthiness of it. It really does well for a lot of agriculture in Oklahoma. A lot of small farmers, CSAs, they use that method.
Right. And, I like that. I like that method. I think it's nice and clean, but I think, what do they do with all that plastic at the end of the season? Because they have to just hopefully recycle it.
Well, they reuse it here. They reuse it several times. I don't know. And that's as far as I know of it. They also do it because they can do drip irrigation that goes directly to the plants that they're growing. And then on top of that, they can put fertilization in the irrigation. Does that make sense? Yeah, they do liquid fertilizer. So, which is something we were going to talk about, where melons do love fertilizer.
They should be fertilized before they bloom, hold back the nitrogen after they bloom, hit them with the nitrogen.
And why would you hold back nitrogen, Carol, before they bloom?
Because nitrogen says to the plant, grow leaves, grow leaves, grow leaves.
Don't worry about blooms.
Don't worry about blooms. So you want to wait until it starts blooming, and then nitrogen, so it becomes a vigorous plant.
Because the more leaves you have after the plant blooms, the more sunlight that it can absorb, and also it just will do better. It'll be a bigger, healthier plant. But it is true with almost all vegetable gardening. The more nitrogen you give a plant, the more you're saying, hey, bugs, come visit me, too.
Yes. It's a nice, healthy plant for you to eat.
Yay.
So speaking of bugs, reminds me of bees. Here's the last thing I want to say about melons.
Okay.
Melons, like squash and cucumbers, have male and female flowers. You need pollinators. You need bees to visit the male flower and then the female flower, or nobody's getting any melons.
Yeah, that's true. And that includes bumblebees, squash bees, honeybees, all the bees. Wood bees,
Exactly.
they all pollinate those crops. And in fact, squash has its own bee called a squash bee. Sweat bees are another one that I can think of off the top of my head. And so that kind of ties into our flour and our dirt, both.
Right.
Because you're gonna attract bees to your garden by growing goldenrod and other pollinator-friendly plants. And then our dirt is about a book I read, and now Carol's reading it.
That's right. It's The Beekeeper's Lament by Hannah Nordhaus. I think that's Nordhaus.
I think it's Nordhaus. Yep.
Anyway, she wrote this book, and it's been around a while. And you told me it was a great book to read, and I've just started reading it a couple of days ago. It's a great story about the beekeepers and the
migratory beekeepers, the big guys.
Right. They travel around with literally millions of bees and show up in California at the time the almonds are blooming. They go up to Seattle for, I don't know, apples or something like that. And then over to North Dakota, cherries. And you think, well, why don't we just, why do we need to bring in bees and stuff? And just in the little bit I read, it's like, you would not have near the almond crop in California.
You wouldn't have one at all. There would be no almond crop, period, because they've gotten rid of all the undergrowth under the orchards. And so they have to truck in bees. They don't have very many native pollinators in the almond orchards. So they have to truck in bees honeybees, in order to have anything pollinate their almonds. And that part, I knew about that aspect of it, but I didn't really understand why. And this book really goes into it and explains it. And it follows a particular beekeeper, and he's really famous. And he's actually the grandson of the man who first did migratory hauling of honeybees. But it explains all about how honeybees have had a really rough time and about colony collapse disorder. But it is not a depressing book. It's a really good book that reads a little bit like an adventure novel, I thought.
Yes, and that's what I'm finding so far. I mean, as soon as we hang up, I got to go back to reading it.
It's good.
So we recommend that. And I did, I bought it for my Kindle, and we'll link to that Amazon Prime right now. Not to say if you listen to this podcast in another year, this will be the case, but they have it free on the Kindle.
Right. And I think I paid 99 cents for it on Kindle months ago. Yeah.
Or go to your local library. They probably have a copy there.
It's a very, very famous book.
Yes. And speaking of books, I think it's really important that, I think a lot of adults our age don't really have enough information on insects in their lives. They didn't study enough. And I think it's really important to educate people on insects and the value. And I know my sisters have done a good job of teaching their kids not to run screaming whenever there was a wasp that shows up. Be respectful, but you don't got to run screaming into the house because there's a wasp out there.
Right. In fact, Megan and I were in my dog run that runs between my garage and my house. There are some mud daubers, and Megan was scared of one the other day, and I was like, "It won't sting you." And she goes, "Why won't it sting me?" And I go, "Because it doesn't have a stinger." And she said, "How is that possible? What good is it? What use is it?" And I go, I assume it's a pollinator, but it won't hurt you." Because she thought she would get stung. And I said, "No, it won't sting you."
Right. Because most of the mud dabblers that you see, a lot of them are the male mud dabblers. They don't have stingers. The female mud dabblers do have stingers, but they're not interested in stinging you. You know what mud daubers sting?
What do they sting?
Spiders. They sting spiders, and it paralyzes the spider, and then they drag the spider up into their mud tunnels that they have on the side of the house. And then when they hatch their young, there's paralyzed spiders in there that the young can eat for food.
Yeah, nature's gross, but interesting. So I guess the females make the mud nests. But it looks to me like, and I haven't had a chance to research this yet, but I think, that's what I thought. Okay, so after she creates the cells and lays the eggs, then she doesn't return. So nobody's going to sting you. I don't know if the males watch over the nests a little bit or if those are little solitary wasps that have just come out of the nest. But anyway, I've never been stung by a mud dauber. I've been stung by plenty of other wasps, but not a mud dauber. So you don't have to worry. And like bees, the male bees don't have stingers either.
Well, and the other thing, the great big cicada killing wasps, and
cicada killer. Mm-hmm.
We're way off topic now, but the males,
now we are, yeah.
They hover around the holes that they have, and everybody's afraid of them. It's like they don't have stingers either. They are completely
right.
They're just a bunch of bravado.
Yeah, they're harmless, just like wood bees. Big old giant wood bees that get in your face and act like they're going to hurt you. Those are the boys.
Right.
And I always tell that to my friends. I'm like, you could knock him out of the sky and he might be mad at you, but he's not going to sting you because he can't.
Right.
So enough about that. Boy bees don't have stingers. And I'm not going to say all boy wasps don't, but many boy wasps don't, for sure. And that brings us back to a couple of other books on bees that we like.
Well, I got this book. I got a review copy of a book called Bees, and it's about a little girl named Bee, B-E-A, and she learns all about bees. It's by Catherine Pryor. And I thought this was a sweet little book. It's got some nice illustrations, but it kind of teaches, she sets out to learn about bees when she sees them, and then she finds out how beneficial they are. And so it's got some nice facts and stuff. And I'm going to take this to my niece. My great nephew will love this book. So that one, it's nice to have books about insects for kids to teach them that insects are good things to have around.
Right, because they are. I know they're pesky, especially certain ones like cicadas, but that we won't talk about them today. The other book I wanted to mention was The Little Book of Bees by Hilary Kearney. Hilary Kearney wrote Queen Spotting, which has been very, very popular, but now she's got a new book coming out on September 10th, and it's this Little Book of Bees. And we will link to all of these in our show notes. And it is about bees other than the honeybee. She may also talk about the honeybee because she is a beekeeper, but it's about all different types of bees. So I'm really excited about that.
Yes, that'll be a good one to get. So we kind of got off topic with wasps, but
Sorry.
That's okay. I kind of took us there. So that's our podcast today. We've talked about Goldenrod. We've talked about melons. And we talked about some books on bees that we like.
And so we hope you enjoyed it. It was great chatting with you over the garden gate today, Carol.
It was great chatting with you. Folks can find us, just Google Garden Angeles, and you'll find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. If you like our podcast, we'd appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes. Bye now.
We would. Thank you. Bye-bye.